I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. It is so echoey in here. Oh, god damn it. Oh, fine. Go on, seat yourself, you little idiot. I was just testing out my new rearrangements here as I redecorate the, I want to say foyer, but it's not. It's the drawing room. Yeah, the drawing room. That's the bit I work with here. Welcome to the drawing room, where I've redecorated, and it's really echoey in here. Way echoey than other episodes. I decided to redo this room, and now it's so echoey that it's impossible to record in, which not only ruins my podcast, but it ruins the podcast of Unsighted, where my wife, Gertie, and I were guests on for their Christmas Carol episode, and boy was it echoey the whole time we talked. So you get to deal with that till I finally figure my shit out. Welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, we're continuing to read Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. Want to learn about the author? Sure. I stole all this from Wikipedia. Emily Brontë, born July 30th, 1818, died December 19th, 1848, was an English novelist and poet who is best known for her only novel, Wuthering Heights, now considered a classic of English literature. She also published a book of poetry with her sister Charlotte and Anne, titled Poems by Kerr, Ellis, and Acton Bell. Every time I read that part, I just can't help but think those are the weirdest names you could possibly pick, and they don't sound appealing. With her own poems finding regard as poetic genius. She died of tuberculosis, most likely caused by runoff water from a nearby graveyard. Want to hear some fun facts? Sure, why not? I stole this from thecollector.com. The eldest two Brontë sisters died of consumption due to poor boarding school conditions. In 1824, the four eldest Brontë sisters, Maria, Elizabeth, Charlotte, and Emily, were sent away to be educated at Clergy Daughters' School in Cowan Bridge in Lancashire. Anne was not yet old enough to attend school, and Branwell, the only male child of the Brontë family, was to be educated at home. Conditions at Cowan Bridge were dismal, cold, damp, and unhygienic. And within a year, a typhoid epidemic ripped through the school. Maria and Elizabeth came down with consumption, tuberculosis, soon after, and were sent home. Oh, they never recovered, dying within weeks of each other. Jesus. Charlotte and Emily did not return to Cowan Bridge after the deaths of their sisters. Charlotte would later use her brief experience there as an inspiration for Lockwood, the harsh boarding school attended by her titular protagonist, Jane Eyre. I could read more, but I probably shouldn't, because the grandfather clock's going to be hitting pretty soon. It's going to tell me to shut up, and we're going to go downstairs and continue reading this book. What else can I talk about? Oh, thank God. Well, with that, why don't we go down to the library where we can continue reading this book? All right, well, why don't you get yourself seated here in my also echoey library of the mansion as I read to you Chapter 28, XXVIII. Wow, something's happening to me. I think it's all the White Claws. I'm slowly deteriorating mentally where I can't read Roman numerals. On the 5th morning, or rather afternoon, a different step approached, lighter and shorter. And this time, the person entered the room. I was Zilla, huh? Donned in a scarlet shawl with a black silk bonnet on her head and a willow basket swung to her arm. Dear Miss Dean, she exclaimed. Well, there is talk about you and Gimmerton. I never thought, but you were sunk into the Black Horse Marsh, huh? And Missy with you. Till Master told me you've been found. He lodged you here. What? Exclamation point. You must have got on an island, sure. And how long were you in the hole? Did Master save you, Miss Dean? Oh, but you're not so thin. You've not been so poorly, have you? Ugh, I already hate her. Your master is a true scoundrel, I replied, but he shall answer for it. He needn't have raised that tale, and it shall be laid bare. Hey, what do you mean? Asked Zilla. It's not his tale. They tell that in the village about you being lost in the marsh, and I calls to Earnshaw when I come. These queer things, Mr. Hareton, happened since I went off. Oh, it's a sad pity of that likely young lass. And can't Nellie Dean? He stared, and I thought he had not heard aught, so I told him the rumor. The master listened, and he just smiled to himself. And he said, if they've been in the marsh, they're out now. Zilla, Nellie Dean is lodged at this minute in your room. Oh, yeah, and you can tell her to flit when you go up. Here's the key. The bogwater got into her head. She must have run home quite flighty, but I fixed her till she came round to her senses. Oh, and you can bid her go to the Grange at once, if she be able, and carry a message for me, that her young lady will follow in time to attend the squire's funeral. Mr. Edgar's not dead? I gasped. Oh, Zilla! No, sit down, my good mistress, she replied. You're right sickly yet. He's not dead. Dr. Kenneth thinks that he may last another day, and I met him on the road and asked. Instead of sitting down, I snatched my outdoor things and hastened below, for the way was free. On entering the house, I looked about for someone to give information to Catherine, and the place was filled with sunshine, and the door stood wide open, but nobody seemed at hand. As I hesitated whether to go off at once or return and seek my mistress, a slight cough drew my attention to the hearth. Linton lay on the settle, sole tenant, sucking a stick of sugar candy and pursuing my movements with apathetic eyes. Where is Miss Catherine? I demanded sternly. Supposing I could frighten him into giving intelligence by catching him thus alone, he sucked on like an innocent. Is she gone? I said. No, he replied. She's upstairs. She's not to go. We won't let her. You won't let her, you little idiot, I exclaimed. Direct me to her room immediately, or I'll make you sing out sharply. Papa would make you sing out if you attempted to get there, he answered. He says I'm not to be soft with Catherine. She's my wife, and it's shameful that she should wish to leave me. He says she hates me and wants me to die, and that she may have my money, but she shan't have it, and she shan't go home. She never shall. Oh, she may cry and be sick as much as she pleases. He resumed his former occupation, closing his lids as if he meant to drop asleep. Master Heathcliff, I resumed, have you forgotten all Catherine's kindnesses to you last winter, when you affirmed love to her, and when she brought you books and sung you songs? What, she sings songs? This is my wife never sang me songs. Well, my first wife did, and it probably explains that. And he came many a time through the wind and snow to see you. Oh, she wept to miss one evening because you wouldn't be disappointed, and you felt that when she was 100 times too good for you, and now you believe the lies your father tells, though you know he detests you both, and you join him against her. That's fine gratitude, is it not? The corner of Linton's mouth fell, and he took the sugar candy from his lips. Did she come to Wuthering Heights because she hated you? I continue. Think for yourself. As for your money, she doesn't even know you have any. And you say she's sick, and yet you leave her alone, up there in a strange house. You, who have felt what it is to be so neglected. You could pity your own sufferings, and she pitied them too, but you won't pity hers. I shed tears, Master Heathcliff. Oh, you see, an elderly woman and a servant merely, and you, after pretending such affection, having reason to worship her almost, store every tear you have for yourself and lie there quite at ease. You're a heartless, selfish boy. I can't stay with her, he answered crossly. I'll not stay by myself. She cries so I can't bear it. And she won't give over, though I'll say I called my father, and I did call him once, and he threatened to strangle her, Jesus, if she was not quiet. But she began again the instant he left the room, moaning and grieving all night long, though I screamed for vexation that I couldn't sleep. Is Mr. Heathcliff out? I inquired, perceiving that the wretched creature had no power to sympathize with his cousin's mental tortures. He's in the court, he replied, talking to Dr. Kenneth, who says Uncle is dying, truly at last. I'm glad, for I shall be master of the Grange after him. Catherine always spoke of it as her house. It isn't hers. It's mine. Papa says everything she has is mine. All her nice books are mine. Oh, that's pretty nice. She offered to give me them and her pretty birds. What? I don't remember reading that she's got this collection of exotic birds. And her pony, Minnie. Okay, weird. If I were to get the key out of our room and I let her out, but I told her she had nothing to give. They were all mine. And she cried, and I took a little picture from her neck, and I said that I should have that. 2 pictures in a gold case, one on side of her mother and the other her uncle. And when they were young. And that was yesterday. And I said they were mine too. And tried to get them from her. The spiteful thing wouldn't let me. And she pushed me off and hurt me. Ow, I shrieked out. That frightens her. Oh, she heard Papa coming, and she broke the hinges and divided the case and gave me her mother's portrait. And the other she attempted to hide. But Papa asked what was the matter, and I explained it. He took the one I had away and ordered her to resign hers to me. She refused, and he struck her down, Jesus, and wrenched it off the chain and crushed it with his foot. And were you pleased to see her struck, I asked, having my designs and encouraging his talk. I winked, he answered. What? I winked to see my father strike a dog or a horse. He does it so hard, yet I was glad at first. She deserved punishing for punishing me. But when Papa was gone, she made me come to the window and showed me her cheek, cut on the inside against her teeth, and her mouth filling with blood. Oh, and then she gathered up the bits of the picture and went and sat down with her face to the wall. And she has never spoken to me since, and sometimes I think she can't speak for pain. I don't like to think so, but she is a naughty thing for crying continually. When she looks so pale and wild, I'm afraid of her. I'm just freaked out that when he, not winced, I mean, it says wink, so when his dad beats a horse or his wife, he just kind of goes, bing, and I see what you're doing. And you can get the key if you choose, I said. Yes, when I'm upstairs, he answered. Oh, but I can't walk upstairs now. In what apartment is it? I asked. Oh, he cried, I shan't tell you where it is. It's our secret. Nobody, neither Hareton nor Zillah, is to know. There, you've tired me. Go away, go away. And he turned his face onto his arm, and he shut his eyes again. Verb, I considered it best to depart without seeing Mr. Heathcliff, and being a rescue for my young lady from the Grange. On reaching it, the astonishment of my fellow servants to see me and their joy also was intense. And when they heard that their little mistress was safe, 2 or 3 were about to hurry up and shout the news at Mr. Edgar's door. Oh, but I bespoke the announcement of it to myself. Oh, how changed I found him, even in those few days. He lay, an image of sadness and resignation, awaiting his death. Very young he looked, though his actual age was 39. One would have called him 10 years younger, at least. Oh, he thought of Catherine, for he murmured her name, and I touched his hand and spoke. Catherine is coming, dear master, I whispered. She is alive and well, and will be here, I hope, tonight. I trembled at the first effects of this intelligence, and he half rose up, looked eagerly round the apartment, and sank back into a swoon. As soon as he recovered, I related our compulsory visit and detention at the Heights. I said Heathcliff forced me to go in, which was not quite true. I uttered as little as possible against Linton, nor did I describe all his father's brutal conduct. All my intentions being to add no bitterness, if I could help it, to his already overflowing cup. He divined that one of his enemy's purposes was to secure the personal property, as well as the estate, to his son, or rather to himself. Yet why did he not wait till his decease was a puzzle to my master, because ignorant how nearly he was that his nephew would quit the world together. However, he felt that his will had better be altered. Instead of leaving Catherine's fortune at her own disposal, he determined to put it in the hands of trustees for her use during life, and for her children if she had any after her. By that means, it could not fall into Mr. Heathcliff should Linton die. Having received the orders, I dispatched a man to fetch the attorney, and four more, provided with serviceable weapons, to demand my young lady of her jailer. Both parties delayed very late. The single servant returned first, and he was Mr. Green. The lawyer was out when he arrived at the house, and he had to wait 2 hours for his re-entrance. And then Mr. Green told him about he had a little business in the village that must be done, and that he would be at Thrushcross Grange. Before I said that very well this time. The four men came back unaccompanied also. They brought word that Catherine was ill. Too ill to quit her room, and Heathcliff would not suffer them to see her. I scolded the stupid fellows well for listening to that tale, which I would not carry to my master, resolving to take the whole bevy up to the Heights at daylight and storm it, literally, unless the prisoner were quietly surrendered to us. Her father shall see her, I vowed, and vowed again, if that devil be killed in his own door-stones in trying to prevent it. Happily, I was spared the journey and the trouble. I had gone downstairs at, 3 o'clock to fetch a jug of water, and was passing through the hall with it in my hand, when a sharp knock at the front door made me jump. Oh! It is Green, I said, recollecting myself. Only Green. And I went on, intending to send somebody else to open it, but the knock was repeated, not loud, but still importunately, and I put the jug on the banister and hastened to admit him myself. I hope that jug falls over at some point, dramatically, at some sort of bad news. The harvest moon shone clear outside, and it was not the attorney. My own sweet little mistress sprang on my neck, sobbing, Ellen, is Papa alive? Oh, I hope this jug falls over. Yes, I cried. Yes, my angel, he is. God be thanked. You are safe with us again. Oh, she wanted to run, breathless as she was, upstairs to Mr. Linton's room, but I compelled her to sit down on a chair and made her drink and washed her pale face, chafing it into a faint color with my apron. When's this jug going to fall down? And then I said I must go first and tell of her arrival, imploring her to say that she would be happy with young Heathcliff. She stared, but soon comprehending my why I counseled her to utter such a falsehood, she assured me she would not complain. I couldn't abide to be present at their meeting. I stood outside the chamber door a quarter of an hour and hardly ventured near the bed. Then all was composed, however. Catherine's despair was as silent as the father's joy. She supported him calmly in appearance, and he fixed on her features his raised eyes that seemed dilating with ecstasy. I died blissfully, Mr. Lockwood. He died so. Kissing her cheek, he murmured, I'm going to her, and you, darling child, shall come to us. Creepy. Don't say stuff like that, even when you're dying. And never stirred or spoke again, but continued that rapt, radiant gaze, till his pulse imperceptibly stopped and his soul departed. None could have noticed the exact minute of his death. It was so entirely without struggle. Oh, whether Catherine had spent her tears, or whether the grief were too weighty to let them flow, she sat there dry-eyed till the sun rose. She sat till noon. Oh, it would have still remained brooding over that deathbed, but I insisted on her coming away and taking some repose. It was well I succeeded in removing her, for at dinner time appeared the lawyer, having called at Wuthering Heights to get his instructions on how to behave. He had sold himself to Mr. Heathcliff, but that was the cause of his delay in obeying my master's summons. Fortunately, no thought of worldly affairs crossed the latter's mind to disturb him after his daughter's arrival. Mr. Green took upon himself to order everything and everybody about the place. He gave all the servants, but me, notice to quit. He would have carried his delegated authority to the point of insisting that Edgar Linton should not be buried beside his wife, but in the chapel with his family. There was the will, however, to hinder that, and my loud protestations against any infringement of his directions. The funeral was hurried over. Catherine, Mrs. Linton, Heathcliff now, was suffered to stay at the Grange till her father's corpse had quitted it. She told me that her anguish had at last spurred Linton to incur the risk of liberating her, and she heard the man I said discussing at the door, and she gathered the sense of Heathcliff's answer. It drove her desperate. Linton, who had been conveyed up to the little parlor soon after I left, was terrified into fetching the key before his father reascended. He had the cunning to unlock and relock the door without shutting it. And then he would have gone to bed. He begged to sleep with Hareton, and his petition was granted for once. Catherine stole out before the break of day. She dared not try the doors, lest the dog should raise an alarm. She visited the empty chambers and examined their windows, and luckily, lighting on her mother's, she got easily out of the lattice and onto the ground by means of the fir tree close by. Her accomplice suffered for his share of the escape, notwithstanding his timid contrivances. Chapter 29. The evening after the funeral, my young lady and I were seated in the library, just like we are right now. Now musing mournfully, one of us despairingly on our loss, now venturing conjectures as to the gloomy future. We had just agreed the best destiny which could await Catherine would be a permission to continue resident in the Grange. At least during Linton's life, he being allowed to join her there, and I remain as the housekeeper. Well, that seemed rather too favorable an arrangement to be hoped for, and yet I did hope, and began to cheer up under the prospect of retaining my home and my employment, and above all, my beloved young mistress, when a servant, one of the discarded ones, not yet departed, rushed hastily in and said, "That devil, Heathcliff, was coming through the court. Should he fasten the door in his face? We had not been mad enough to order that proceeding. We had not time. He made no ceremony of knocking or announcing his name. He was master, and availed himself of the master's privilege to walk straight in without saying a word. Burp. God, I'm burping. The sound of our informant's voice directed him to the library, and he entered, and motioning him out, shut the door. It was the same room into which he had been ushered as a guest 18 years before. The same moon shone through the window, and the same autumn landscape lay outside. We had not yet lighted a candle, but all the apartment was visible. Visible. Even to the portraits on the wall, the splendid head of Mrs. Linton, and the graceful one of her husband. Heathcliff advanced the hearth. Time had little altered his person either. There was the same man, his dark face rather sallower and more composed, his frame a stone or two heavier perhaps, and no other difference. Catherine had risen with an impulse to dash out when she saw him. "Stop," he said, arresting her by the arm. "No more runnings away. Where would you go? I've come to fetch you home, and I hope you'll be a dutiful daughter and not encourage my son further disobedience. I was embarrassed how to punish him when I discovered his part of the business. Such a cobweb. A pitch would annihilate him. But you'll see by his look that he has received his due. I brought him down one evening, the day before yesterday, and just set him in a chair and never touched him afterwards. I sent Hareton out, and we had the room to ourselves. In 2 hours, I called Joseph to carry him up again, and since then my presence is as potent on his nerves as a ghost. Yeah, yes. And I fancy he sees me often, though I am not near. Oh, Hareton says he wakes, and shrieks in the night by the hour together, and he calls you to protect him from me. And whether you like your precious mate or not, you must come home. He's your concern now, and I yield all my interest in him to you. Why not let Catherine continue here, I pleaded, and send Master Linton to her. As you hate them both, you'll not miss them. They can only be a daily plague to your unnatural heart. I'm seeking a tenant for the Grange, he answered, and I want my children about me, to be sure. Besides, that lass owes me her services for her bread, and I'm not going to nurture her in luxury and idleness after Linton's gone. Make haste and get ready now, and don't oblige me to compel you. Yeah, I shall, said Catherine. Linton is all I have to love in the world, and though you have done what you could to make him hateful to me and me to him, you cannot make us hate each other, And I defy you to hurt him when I'm by, and I defy you to frighten me. You boastful champion, replied Heathcliff, but I don't like you well enough to hurt him, and you shall get the full benefit of the torment as long as it lasts. It is not I who will make him hateful to you. It is his own sweet spirit. It's his bitterest gall at your desertion and its consequences. Oh, don't expect thanks for his noble devotion. I heard him draw a pleasant picture of Zillah, of what he would do if he were strong as I. The inclination is there, and is his very weakness will sharpen his wits and find a substitute for his strength. I know he's got a bad nature, said Catherine. He's your son. But I'm glad I've better to forgive it. And I know he loves me, and for that reason I love him. Mr. Heathcliff, you, in italics, have nobody, in italics, to love you. And, of course, however miserable you make us, we shall still have the revenge of thinking that your cruelty arises from your greater misery. Oh, you are miserable, are you not? Lonely like the devil and envious like him. Nobody loves you, and nobody will cry for you when you die. I wouldn't be you. Catherine spoke with a kind of dreary triumph. She seemed to have made up her mind to enter the spirit of her future family and draw pleasure from the griefs of their enemies. You should be sorry to be yourself presently, said her father-in-law, if you stand there another minute. Begone, witch, and get your things. She scornfully withdrew, and in her absence I began to beg for Zillah's place at the Heights, offering to resign mine to her, but he would suffer it on no account. He bid me be silent, and then, for the first time, allowed himself a glance around the room to look at the pictures. Having studied Mrs. Linton's, he said, I shall have that home. Not because I need it. He turned abruptly to the fire and continued with what, for lack of a better word, I must call a smile. I'll tell you what I did yesterday. I got the sexton, who was digging Linton's grave, to remove the earth off her coffin lid, and I opened it. Now, I thought once I should have stayed there when I saw her face again. It is hers yet. He had hard work to stir me, but he said it would change if the air blew on it, and so I struck one side of the coffin loose and covered it up. Not Linton's side. Damn him. I wish that he'd been soldered in lead. And I bribed the sexton to pull it away when I'm laid there and slide mine out too. And I'll have it made so. And then by the time Linton gets us, he'll know not which is which. What is he talking? So I guess he opened up one side of her coffin, like the side wall, just like tore it out. And then when he gets buried, he's going to take out his side. So what? They're going to like hold hands under the earth? What the hell? You're very wicked, Mr. Heathcliff, I exclaimed. Were you not ashamed to disturb the dead? I disturbed nobody, Nellie, he replied, and I gave some ease to myself. I shall be a great deal more comfortable now, and you shall have a better chance of keeping me underground when I get there. Disturbed her? Question mark? No! Exclamation point. She has disturbed me. Night and day. Through 18 years, incessantly, remorselessly, until yesternight, and yesternight I was tranquil. I dreamed I was sleeping the last sleep by that sleeper. Weird. With her heart stopped and my cheek frozen against hers. And if she had been dissolved into the earth, or worse, what would you have dreamt of then? I said. of dissolving with her. And be more happy still, he answered. Do you suppose I dread any change of that sort? I expected such a transformation on raising the lid, but I am better pleased that it should not commence till I share it. Besides, unless I have received the distinct impression of her passionless features, that strange feeling would hardly have been removed. It began oddly. Oh, you know I was wild after she died, he said eternally, from dawn to dawn, praying her to return to me in her spirit. And I have a strong faith in ghosts. I have a conviction that they can and do exist among us. The day she was buried, there came a fall of snow, and in the evening I went to the churchyard. When it blew bleak as winter, all around was solitary, and I didn't fear that her fool of a husband would wander up the glen so late, and no one else had business to bring them there. Being alone and conscious, 2 yards of loose earth was the sole barrier between us. I said to myself, I'll have her in my arms again. If she be cold, I'll think it is this north wind that chills me. And if she be motionless, it is sleep. I got a spade from the tool house and began to delve with all my might. I scraped the coffin, I fell to work with my hands, and the wood commenced cracking about the screws, and I was on the point of attaining my object, when it seemed that I heard a sigh from someone above, close off at the edge of the grave. And bending down, if I could only get this off, I muttered, I wish that they may shovel the earth over us both. And I wrenched at it more desperately till, and there was another sigh, close to my ear. I peeled an ear, warm beneath it, displacing the sleet-laden wind, and I knew no living thing in flesh and blood was by, but as certainly as you perceive the approach of some substantial body in the dark, though it cannot be discerned, so certainly I felt that Kathy was there, not under me, but on the earth. A sudden sense of relief flowed from my heart through my every limb. I relinquished my labor of agony and turned consoled at once, unspeakably consoled. Her presence was with me. It remained while I refilled the grave and led me home. You may laugh, if you will, but I was sure I could see her there, and I was sure that she was with me, and I could not help talking to her. Having reached the heights, I rushed eagerly to the door, and it was fastened. And I remember that accursed Earnshaw and my wife opposed my entrance. I remember stopping to kick the breath out of him. And then, that's right, he was like through the window. And then hurrying upstairs to my room and hers, I looked round impatiently and I felt her by me. I could almost see her, and yet I could not. I ought to have sweat blood then from the anguish of my yearning, from the fervor of my supplications, which had been one glimpse. I had not one, but she showed herself, as she often does in life, a devil to me. And then, since then, sometimes more and sometimes less, and I've been the sport of intolerable torture. Infernal. Burp, keeping my nerves at such a stretch that if they had not resembled catgut. What is catgut? I've heard the term catgut before. I think it's some kind of cloth. Catgut, noun, a material used for the strings of musical instruments and for surgical sutures, made of the dried, twisted intestines of sheep or horses, but not cats. Okay, well, we know that much now. That was a waste of time. They would not long go to have relaxed to the feebleness of Linton's. And when I sat in the house with Hareton, it seemed that ongoing I should meet her. And when I walked on the moors, I should meet her coming in. And when I went from home, I hastened to return, but she must be somewhere in the heights. I was certain. And when I slept in her chamber, I was beaten out of that. I couldn't lie there. For the moment I closed my eyes, she was either outside the window or sliding back the panels, or entering the room, or even resting her darling head on the same pillow as she did when she was a child, and I must open my lids to see. And so I opened and closed them 100 times a night. I had to be always disappointed. It racked me. I often groaned aloud till the old rascal Joseph no doubt believed that my conscience was playing the fiend inside of me. And now, since I've seen her, I am pacified. A little. It was a strange way of killing, not by inches but by fractions of hairbreadths, to beguile me with the specter of a hope through 18 years. Mr. Heathcliff paused and wiped his forehead. His hair clung to it, wet with perspiration. His eyes were fixed on the red embers of the fire. The brows were not contracted, but raised next to the temples, diminishing the grim aspect of his countenance, but imparting a particular look of trouble and a painful appearance of mental tension toward one absorbing subject. He only half addressed me, and I maintained silence. I didn't like to hear him talk. After a short period, he resumed his meditation on the picture and took it down and leaned in against the sofa to contemplate it at a better advantage. While so occupied, Catherine entered, announcing that she was ready when her pony should be saddled. "Send that over tomorrow," said Heathcliff to me. Then returned to her, he added, You may do without your pony. It's a fine evening, and you'll need no ponies at Wuthering Heights. For what journeys you take, your own feet will serve you again. Come along." "Goodbye, Ellen," whispered my dear little mistress as she kissed me, and her lips felt like ice. "Come and see me, Ellen, don't forget. Take care that you do no such thing, Mrs. Dean," said her new father. "And when I wish to speak to you, I'll come here. I want none of your prying at my house." He signed her to precede him, and casting back a look that cut my heart, she obeyed. I watched them from the window walk down the garden. Heathcliff fixed Catherine's arm under his, though she disputed the act at first evidently, and with rapid strides he hurried her into the alley, whose trees concealed them. Well, that seems like a pretty good place to stop. And before we read the next couple chapters, why don't we take a little moment to, get out of this echoey room and go to a more echoey room, the basement, where we got naked light bulbs that we stand under, and I play guitar at you while I tell you about the latest upcoming books from Penguin Random House. Well, there you are. I've been waiting here the whole time, stringing my instrument. Can you hear me? Yeah, I get pretty good. Why don't you sit there in that folding chair underneath that naked light bulb? Well, I stand here underneath this naked light bulb and play my guitar as I tell you about the newest, latest upcoming book from Penguin Random House, Spellbound, Poems of Magic and Enchantment, edited by Kamiko Hahn and Harold Schechter. Burp. About Spellbound, sure. A unique anthology of poems from around the world and through the ages that celebrate magic and magicians. I learned recently that in the Middle Ages, if a male magician or whatever, they were called a cunning man. They literally called them that. I don't know why. No matter how modern or scientifically advanced our societies become, human beings remain perpetually enthralled by the idea of magic. From our daily superstitions to our choices of entertainment, magic has long been a central subject of poetry, and the poems in this collection are evocative evidence that the poet's art depends on the form of wizardry. The ability to conjure enchantment from a particular combination of words. Venerable literary wizards such as Shakespeare's Prospero, Tennyson's Merlin, and T.S. Eliot's Mr. Mistopheles make appearances here alongside illusionists and predestinators in K. Ryan's Houdini, Ted Kosser's Card Trick, Charles Simick's My Magician, and Richard Wilbur's The Mind Reader. Here is a treasury of poetic spells, charms, and incantations from Elise Passion's Love Spell, Robert Graves' Love and Black Magic, and Lou Yu's The Peddler of Spells, to a Cherokee Spell to Destroy Life, and here too are all sorts of sorcerers, conjecturers, and enchantresses, and witches, as captured in Emily Dickinson's Best Witchcraft is Geometry, Michael Schmidt's Nine Witches, and H.D. Circle, keeping company with magical poems from cultures around the world. Everyman's Library pocket poets are pocket-sized hardcovers that feature acid-free cream-colored paper, bound in full cloth case. Yeah, with 2-color foil stamping. Yeah, you're not going to find that anywhere. Decorative end papers. Good luck finding that. A silk ribbon marker. Oh, you're living the good life. A European-style half-round spine. And get a load of this one. A full-color illustrated jacket. Well, with that selling right there, that's fantastic. I want one of those. I'm wet. They get Spellbound, Poems of Magic and Enchantment, edited by Kimiko Hahn and Harold Schechter. Category poetry. You can get that hardcover for $20. March 12th. You can get it from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshop.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's Target. And you know that you're in a place of pantheists, occultists, and other Satanists, when they're all crowding around in one spot in an aisle, and you're like, oh, I'm just trying to get a giant tub of cheese balls, but there's these people wearing black cloaks and weird, like, fake vampire teeth in their mouth, and they're all standing around just kind of humming in unison, and you're like, oh, what are they looking at? And they're looking at a copy of Spellbound, Poems of Magic and Enchantment in the aisles of Walmart. Well, with that, why don't we go back up to the library and remove the moisture of this basement from our shoulders and our hair, and continue reading the next couple chapters of this book. Go get yourself settled. You seem a little shaken since you come back from the basement. I don't know what problems you have with the basement. Yes, it's a little wet. I use that water for my CPAP. Yes, it's a little cold. It's fine. So just snuggle up and get yourself settled, and let's just enjoy Chapter 30. I have paid a visit to the Heights, but I have not seen her since she'd left. Joseph held the door in his hand when I called to ask after her. Oh, he wouldn't let me pass. He said Mrs. Linton was thrang. I hate this. And the master was not in. Zilla has told me something of the way that they go on. Otherwise, I should hardly know who is dead and who is living. She thinks Catherine haughty and does not like her. I can guess by her talk. My young lady asked some aid of her when she first came. But Mr. Heathcliff told her to follow her own business and let his daughter-in-law look after herself, and Zilla willingly acquiesced. Being narrow-minded, selfish woman, Catherine evinced a child's annoyance at this neglect and repaid it with contempt, and thus enlisted my informant among her enemies, as securely as if she had done some of her a great wrong. I have a long talk with Zilla about 6 weeks ago, a little before you came, and one day we went foregathered on the moor, and this is what she told me. The first thing Miss Linton did, she said, on her arrival at the Heights, was to run upstairs without even wishing good evening to me and Joseph. She shut herself into Linton's room and remained till morning. Then, while Master and Earnshaw were at breakfast, she entered the house and asked all in a quiver if the doctor might be sent for. Her cousin was very ill. We know that, answered Heathcliff, but in his life is not worth a farthing, and I won't spend a farthing on him. But I cannot tell how to do, she said, and if nobody will help me, he'll die. Walk out of the room, cried the master, and let me never hear a word more about him. None here care what becomes of him, and if you do, act the nurse, and if you do not, lock him up and leave him. Then she began to bother me, and I said I'd had enough plague with the tiresome thing, and we each had our tasks, and hers was to wait on Linton. Mr. Heathcliff bid me to leave that labor to her. Oh, how they managed together, I can't tell. I fancy he fretted a great deal and moaned, hissling, night and day, and she had precious little rest. And one could guess by her white face and heavy eyes, she sometimes came to the kitchen all wildered-like and looked as if she would fain beg assistance, that I was not going to disobey the master. I never dare disobey him, Mrs. Dean, and though I thought it wrong that Kenneth should not be sent for, and it was no concern of mine whether to advise or to complain, I always refused to meddle. Once or twice, after we had gone to bed, I happened to open my door again and seen her sitting crying at the stairs top. And then I'd shut myself in quick for fear of being moved to interfere. Oh, I did pity her then, I'm sure. And still, I didn't wish to lose my place, At last, one night, she came boldly into my chamber. Oh, it frightened me out of my wits by saying, tell Mr. Heathcliff that his son... his son is dying. Yeah, I'm sure he is this time. Get up instantly and tell him. Having uttered this speech, she vanished again, and I lay a quarter of an hour listening and trembling, and nothing stirred. The house was quiet. She's mistaken, I said to myself. He got over it. I need to disturb them, and I began to doze. But my sleep was marred a second time by a sharp ringing of a bell. The only bell we have, put up on purpose for Linton. And the master called to me to see what was the matter and informed them that he wouldn't have that noise repeated. Well, I delivered Catherine's message. He cursed to himself and in a few minutes came out with a lighted candle and proceeded to their room. I followed. Mrs. Heathcliff was seated by the bedside with her hands folded on her knees. Her father-in-law went up, held the light to Linton's face, looked at him, and touched him. And afterwards he turned to her. Now, Catherine, he said, how do you feel? Yeah, she was dumb. How do you feel, Catherine? He repeated. He's safe. I'm free, she answered. I should feel well, but, she continued with a bitterness that she couldn't conceal, you have left me so long to struggle against death alone that I feel, and see, only death? I feel like death? And she looked like it, too. Oh, I gave her a little wine. And Hareton and Joseph, who had been wakened by the ringing and the sound of the feet, had heard our talk from outside and now entered. Joseph was fain, I believe, of the lad's removal. Hareton seemed a thought bothered, though he was more taken up with staring at Catherine than thinking of Linton. But the master bid him get off to bed again. Oh, he didn't want his help. He afterwards made Joseph remove the body to his chamber and told me to return to mine, and Mrs. Heathcliff remained by herself. In the morning, he sent me to tell her she must come down to breakfast. Oh, she had undressed and appeared going to sleep and said that she was ill, at which I hardly wondered. Oh, I informed Mr. Heathcliff, and he replied, well, let her be till after the funeral, and then we'll go up now and get her what is needful. And as soon as she seems better, tell me. Kathy stayed upstairs for a fortnight, according to Zillah, who visited her twice a day. Who had been rather more unfriendly, but her attempts at increasing kindness were proudly and promptly repelled. Heathcliff went up once to show her Linton's will, and he had bequeathed the whole of his and what he had been her movable property to his father. The poor creature was threatened or coaxed into the act during her week's absence when his uncle died. The lands, being a minor, he could not meddle with. However, Mr. Heathcliff has claimed and kept them in his wife's right and also his also. And I suppose legally, at any rate, Catherine, destitute of cash and friends, cannot disturb his possession. Nobody, said Zillah, ever approached her door, except that once, but I, and nobody asked anything about her. Oh, the first occasion of her coming down into the house was on, Sunday afternoon, and she had cried out, and when I carried up her dinner, that she couldn't bear any longer being in the cold. And I told her the master was going to Thrushcross Grange, I said it again, I'm really proud of myself, and Earnshaw and I needn't hinder her from descending so. So as soon as she heard Heathcliff's horse trot off, she made her appearance, donned in black, with her yellow curls combed back behind her ears, as plain as a Quaker. She wouldn't comb them out. Joseph and I generally go to the chapel on Sundays. The kirk, has no minister now, explained Mrs. Dean, and they call the Methodist and the Baptist place, and I can't say which it is, Gimmerton, a chapel. Joseph had gone, she continued, but I thought proper to bide at home. Young folks are always the better for elders overlooking. And Hareton, with his bashfulness, isn't a model of nice behavior. Now I let him know that his cousin would likely sit with us, and that she had been always used to see the Sabbath respected, and that she was as good to leave his guns and bits of indoor work alone while she strayed. His colored up at the news and cast his eyes over his hands and clothes. The train oil and gunpowder were shoved out of sight in a minute, and I saw that meant to give her his company. And I guessed by his way that he wanted to be presentable. So, laughing as I durst not laugh when the master is by, I offered to help him if he would, and joked at his confusion. Oh, he grew sullen and began to swear. Now, Miss Dean, Zilla went on, seeing me not pleased by her manner, you happen to think your young lady too fine for Mr. Hareton? It happened, you're right, but I own I should love well to bring her pride a peg lower. And what will all her learning and her daintiness do for her now? Oh, she's as poor as you or I. Poorer, I'll be bound. You're saving, and I'm doing my little all that is wrote. Hareton allowed Zilla to give him her aid, and she flattered him into a good humor. So when Catherine came, half forgetting about her former insults, she tried to make herself agreeable by the housekeeper's account. Mrs. walked in, he said, as chill as an icicle and as high as a princess. I got up and offered her my seat in the armchair. No, she turned up her nose at my civility. Earnshaw rose too and bid her to come to the settle and sit close by the fire. He was sure she was starved. Oh, I've been starved a month or more, she answered, resting on the word as scornful as she could. And she got a chair for herself and placed it at a distance for the both of us. Having sat till she was warm, and she began to look around and discovered a number of books on the dresser. She was instantly upon her feet again, stretching to reach them, but they were too high up, and her cousin, after watching her endeavors a while, at last summoned courage to help her. Oh, she held her frock, and he filled it with the first that came to hand. That was a great advance for the lad. Well, she didn't thank him. Still, she gratified that she had accepted his assistance and ventured to stand behind as she examined them and even stoop and point out what struck his fancy in certain old pictures which they contained. Nor was he daunted by the saucy style in which she jerked the page from his finger. He contented himself with going a bit farther back and looking at her instead of the book, and she continued reading, or seeking, or something to read. His attention became by degrees quite centered on the study of her thick, silky curls. Her face, I couldn't see, but she couldn't see him, and perhaps not quite awake to what he did, but attracted like a child to a candle. At last he proceeded from staring to touching. How he put out his hand and stroked one curl as gently as if it were a bird. He might have struck a knife into her neck, and she started round in such a taking. Get away at this moment. Oh, how dare you touch me? Like a bird. Why are you stopping there? She cried in a tone of disgust. I can't endure you. I'll go upstairs again if you come near me. Mr. Hareton recoiled, looking as foolish as he could do. He sat down in the settle very quiet, and she continued turning over her volumes another half hour. Finally, Earnshaw crossed over and whispered to me, Will you ask her to read to us, Zilla? I'm stalled of doing not, and I do like, I could like to hear her. Do not say I wanted it, but ask yourself. You're selling. I hate when they do this. Mr. Hareton wishes you would read to us, ma'am, I said immediately. He'd take it very kind. He'd be much obliged. She frowned and, looking up, answered, Mr. Hareton and the whole set of you will be good enough to understand that I reject any pretense at kindness that you have, the hypocrisy to offer. Oh, I despise you and will have nothing to say to any of you, when I would have given my life for one kind word, even to see one of your faces. Oh, you all kept off, but I won't complain to you. I'm driven down here by the cold, and not either to amuse or to enjoy your society. What could I have done? Began Earnshaw. How was I to blame? Oh, "Oh, you're an exception," answered Mrs. Heathcliff. "I've never missed such a concern as you." "Yeah, but I offered more than once and asked," he said, kindling up her pertness. "I asked Mr. Heathcliff to let me wake for you." "Be silent! I'll go out of doors or anywhere rather than to have your disagreeable voice in my ear," said my lady. Hareton muttered. She might go to hell for him, and, slinging his gun, retrained himself from his Sunday occupations no longer. He talked now freely enough, and she presently saw fit to retreat to her solitude. But the frost had set in, and in spite of her pride, she was forced to condescend to our company more and more. However, I took care there should be no furthering scorn in my good nature. Ever since, I've been as stiff as herself, and she has no lover or liker among us, and she does not deserve one, for let them say the least word to her, and she'll curl back without respect to anyone. Ow, she'll snap at the master himself, as good as she dares him to thrash her, and the more hurt she gets, the more venomous she grows. At first, on hearing the account from Zillah, I determined to leave my situation, take a cottage, and get Catherine to come and live with me. But Mr. Heathcliff, would as soon permit that he would set up Hareton in an independent house. And I can see no remedy at present unless she could marry again, and that scheme it does not come within my province to arrange. Thus ended Mrs. Dean's story. Notwithstanding the doctor's prophecy, I am rapidly recovering strength, and though it be only the second week of January, I propose getting out on horseback in a day or two and riding over to Wuthering Heights to inform my landlord that I shall spend the next 6 months in London, and if he likes, he may look out for another tenant and take the place after October, and I would not pass another winter here for much. Chapter 31. Yesterday was bright, calm, and frosty, and I went to the Heights as I proposed. My housekeeper entreated me to bear a little note from her to my young lady, and I did not refuse, for the worthy woman was not conscious of anything odd in her request. The front door stood open, but the jealous gate was fastened, and as my last visit, I knocked and evoked Earnshaw from among the garden beds, and he unchained it, and I entered. The fellow is as handsome a rustic as he need be seen. I took particular notice of him this time, but then he does his best, apparently, to make the least of his advantages. I asked if Mr. Heathcliff were at home. He answered, no, but he would be in at dinner time. It was 11 o'clock, and I announced my intention of going in and waiting for him, at which he immediately flung down his tools and accompanied me. In the office of watchdog, not as a substitute for a host. We entered together, and Catherine was there, making herself useful in preparing some vegetables for the approaching meal. And she looked more sulky and less spirited than when I had seen her first. She hardly raised her eyes to notice me, and continued her employment with the same disregard for common forms of politeness as before, never returning my bow and good morning by the slightest acknowledgement. She does not seem so amiable, I thought, as Miss Dean would persuade me to believe. She's a beauty, it's to be true, but it's not an angel. Earnshaw surlily bid her remove her things from the kitchen. "Remove them yourself," she said, pushing them from her as soon as she had done, and retiring to a stool by the window, where she began to carve figures of birds and beasts out of the turnip parings in her lap. That's really weird. I approached her, pretending to desire a view of the garden, as I fancied adroitly dropped Miss Dean's note to her knee, unnoticed by Hareton. But then she asked aloud, what's that? And chucked it off. Moron. I added moron. "A letter from your old acquaintance, the housekeeper at the Grange," I answered, annoyed at her exposing my kind deed, and fearful lest it should be imagined a missive of my own. She would gladly have gathered up this information, but Hareton beat her. He seized and put it in his waistcoat, saying Mr. Heathcliff should look at it first. Thereat. I have never seen the word thereat before. Let's see what it says. At that place. on account or after that. Oh, that was depressing. I expected more out of that. Catherine silently turned her face from us and very stealthily drew out her pocket handkerchief and applied it to her eyes. And her cousin, after struggling a while to keep down his softer feelings, pulled out the letter and flung it on the floor beside her. And as ungraciously as he could, Catherine caught and perused it eagerly. And then she put in a few questions to be concerning inmates and rational and irrational of her former home, and gazing toward the hills, murmured in soliloquy, "Oh, I should like to be riding Minnie down there. Oh, I should like to be climbing up there. Oh, I am tired. I'm stalled. Hareton." And she leant her pretty head back against the sill with half a yawn and half a sigh, and lapsed into an aspect of abstracted sadness, neither caring nor knowing whether we remarked her. "Miss Heathcliff," I said, after sitting for some time, mute, "you are not aware that I am an acquaintance of yours? So intimate that I think it strange you won't come and speak to me. My housekeeper never wearies of talking about and praising you. Oh, she'll be greatly disappointed if I return no news from you, except that you have received this letter and have said nothing." Oh, she appeared to wonder at this speech and asked, Does Ellen like you?" "Yes, very well," I replied hesitatingly. "You must tell her," she continued, "that I would answer her letter, but I have no materials for writing, not even a book from which I might tear a leaf." "No books!" I exclaimed. "How do you contrive to live here without them?" "If I may take the liberty to inquire, though provided with a large library, I'm frequently very dull at the Grange. Take my books away, and should I be desperate?" "Oh, I was always reading when I had 'em," said Catherine, "and Mr. Heathcliff never reads, so he took it into his head to destroy my books, and I have not had a glimpse of one for weeks. Only once I searched through Joseph's store of theology to his great irritation, and once, Hareton, I came upon a secret stock in your room, some Latin and Greek and some tales of poetry, all of old friends, and I brought the last here, and you gathered them as a magpie gathers silver spoons, for the mere love of stealing. Oh, they're no use to you, or else you concealed them in the bad spirit that you cannot enjoy them. Nobody else shall. Perhaps your envy counseled Mr. Heathcliff to rob me of my treasures. Oh, but I've most of them written on my brain and printed in my heart, and you cannot deprive me of those." Earnshaw blushed crimson when his cousin made the revelation of his private literary acclamations, and stammered an indignant denial of accusations. "Mr. Hareton is desirous of increasing his amount of knowledge," I said, coming to the rescue. "He's not envious, but emulous of your attainments. Oh, he'll be a clever scholar in a few years." "He wants me to sink into a dunce meantime," answered Catherine. "Yes, I hear him trying to spell and read to himself, and pretty blunders he makes. I wish you would repeat Chevy Chase as you did yesterday." "Chevy Chase? What?" "Repeat Chevy Chase as you did yesterday." So I guess Chevy Chase is an author or some book of that time? And we know him as the actor/comedian now that's impossible to work with, and he's mildly racist and homophobic and sexist. I need to know more about this Chevy Chase from this time period. It was extremely funny. Oh, just like Chevy Chase. Did he name himself Chevy Chase based off the reference in this book? I got to learn more about this. I heard you turning over the dictionary to seek out the hard words, and then cursing because you couldn't read their explanations. The young man evidently thought it too bad that he should be laughed at for his ignorance, and then laughed at for trying to remove it. I had a similar notion, and remembering Miss Dean's anecdote of his first attempt at enlightening the darkness in which he had been reared, I observed, "But Miss Heathcliff, we have such had a commencement, and each stumbled and tottered on in threshold, and our teachers scored instead of aiding us that we should stumble and totter yet." "Oh," she replied, "I don't wish to limit his acquirements. Still, he has no right to appropriate what is mine and make it ridiculous to me with his vile mistakes and his mispronunciations. Those books, both prose and verse, are consecrated to me by their other associations, and I hate to have them debased and profaned at his mouth. Besides, of all, he has selected my favorite pieces that I love the most to repeat, as if out of deliberate malice. Hareton's chest heaved in silence a minute. Oh, he labored under a severe sense of mortification and wrath, which it was no easy task to suppress, and I rose, and from a gentlemanly idea of relieving his embarrassment, took up my station in the doorway, surveying the external prospect as I stood. Oh, he followed my example and left the room, but presently reappeared, bearing 6 volumes in his hands, which he threw into Catherine's lap, exclaiming, "Take them! I never want to hear or read or think of them again." "Well, I won't have them now," she answered. "I shall not connect them with you and hate them." She opened one that had obviously been turned over and read a portion in the drawing tone of a beginner, and then laughed and threw it from her. "And listen," she continued provokingly, commencing a verse of an old ballad in the same fashion. Oh, but his self-love would endure no further torment. I heard, and not altogether disapprovingly, a mutual check given to his saucy tongue, which the little wretch had done her utmost to hurt her cousin's sensitive, though uncultivated feelings, and a physical argument was the only mode he had of balancing the account, and repaying its effects on the inflictor. Oh, he afterwards gathered the books and hurled them on the fire. Oh, and I read his countenance in anguish, which offer sacrifice spleen, and I fancied that he had consumed. He recalled the pleasure that they had already imparted, and the triumph in the ever-increasing pleasure he had anticipated from them, and I guessed, the incitement to his secret studies also. He had been content with daily labor and rough animal enjoyments, till Catherine crossed his path. Oh, shame at her scorn, and hope of her approval, were the first prompters to higher pursuits, and instead of guarding him from one and winning him to the other, his endeavors to raise himself and produce just the contrary result. "Yes, that's all the good that such a brute as you can get from them," cried Catherine, sucking her damaged lip and watching the conflagration with indignant eyes. "You better hold your tongue now," he answered fiercely, and his agitation precluded further speech. He advanced hastily to the entrance, where I made way for him to pass, but ere he had crossed the door stones, Mr. Heathcliff, coming up the causeway, encountered him, laying hold of his shoulder, asked, "What's to do now, my lad?" Not, he said, and broke away to enjoy his grief and anger and solitude. Heathcliff gazed after him and sighed. "It'll be odd if I thwart myself," he muttered, unconscious that I was behind him. But when I look farther into his face, I find her every day more. How the devil is he so like? I can hardly bear to see him." He bent his eyes to the ground and walked moodily in. There was a restless, anxious expression on his countenance, and I had never remarked there before, and he looked spare in person. His daughter-in-law, now perceiving him through the window, immediately escaped to the kitchen, and so I remained alone. "I'm glad to see you out of doors again, Mr. Lockwood," he said, in reply to my greeting. "From selfish motives partly, I don't think I could readily supply your loss in this desolation, and I've wondered more than once what brought you here." "Oh, an idle whim, I fear, sir," was my answer. Or else an idle whim, I was going to spirit me away. "I shall set out for London next week, and I must give you warning that I feel no disposition to retain Thrushcross Grange beyond the 12 months I agreed to rent it. I believe I shall not live there any more." "Oh, indeed. You're tired of being banished from the world, are you?" he said. But if you're coming to plead off paying for a place you won't occupy, your journey is useless. I never relent in exacting my due from anyone." "Well, I'm coming to plead off nothing about it," I exclaimed, considerably irritated. "Should you wish it, I'll settle with you now." And I drew my notebook from my pocket. No, he replied coolly. "You'll leave sufficient behind to cover your debts. If you fail to return, I'm not in such a hurry. Sit down and take your dinner with us. A guest that is safe from repeating his visit can generally be made welcome. Catherine, bring the things in. Where are you?" "Well, it sounds like the pizza's done. You can hear everyone in the kitchen rummaging around by the oven, trying to get the pizza out, having conversations. That'd be my youngest and my wife. So I gotta hurry this shit up so I can go and eat some goddamn food." Catherine reappeared, bearing a tray of knives and forks. "You may get your dinner with Joseph," muttered Heathcliff aside, "and remain in the kitchen till he's gone." Oh, she obeyed his directions very punctually. Perhaps she had no temptation to transgress. Oh, living among clowns and mythanthropists. Now, she probably cannot appreciate a better class of people when she meets them. With Mr. Heathcliff, grim and saturnine, on the one hand, and Hareton, absolutely dumb on the other, I made somewhat a cheerless meal, and bade adieu early. I would have departed on the way back to get a last glimpse of Catherine and annoy old Joseph, but Hareton received orders to lead up to my horse, and my host himself escorted me to the door, so I could not fulfill my wish. How dreary life gets over in that house, I reflected, while riding down the road. What a realization of something more romantic than a fairy tale it would have been for Mrs. Linton Heathcliff. And she and I struck up an attachment. Oh, God, he's thinking about, getting with her. She's literally suffering. He knows her whole story. Now, okay, fine. As her good nurse desired and migrated together into the stirring atmosphere of the town. Well, with that, why don't we go down to the smoking room where we can have a cigarette and review what the hell we just read. There you are. You finally made it down to the smoking room. I've laid out a pack of Camel cigarettes for you, so why don't you enjoy those while we review what we just read. That's the birds. My wife put the birds in here. Chapters 28 through 31. Heathcliff plans to keep Nellie and Kathy hostage. It doesn't really work out that well, because when Nellie finally escapes and goes back to tell Edgar, Edgar tries to get his lawyer to change his will so Heathcliff can't inherit anything when Linton finally dies, because everyone knows Linton's going to die soon. Heathcliff kind of only has luck on his side, not cunning, to help him win in the end when Edgar dies before the lawyer arrives. So, in his case, where before he was aggressive and had plans, now he's just kind of frantically scurrying around, and things just kind of are good for him so far. So, in this time of stress, Kathy's mom's personality suddenly comes out as she is bullheaded and tells Heathcliff that she's marrying Linton for love no matter how cruel he is to them. Even though Linton's being a huge pile of shit to her and basically saying everything you have is mine, she's like, nope, I could turn this turd around. So they know that his evil acts are just part of how he has no one to love him, and their love being displayed in front of him every day is kind of a form of justice, because it'll drive him crazy. Weirdly, the pressure of the last week causes Linton to show his father's annoying side, where he starts bragging about all of Edgar's shit as going to be now his, even down to the locket she was wearing. Being reminded that he is unloved makes Heathcliff start to act out even more than before. His despair makes him start to hyper-focus on feelings that he had for Catherine. The old Catherine, not the new Catherine. When he goes to Edgar's funeral and asks Catherine's grave be dug up so that he can see her face, he weirdly says that she won't decay until he's dead and lying beside her, because she looks so good still. Then he gets all weird, asking about one side of the casket getting broken open so that when he dies, the side of his casket that faces hers can be cut open and they can hold hands or something. Plus, apparently before this, he spent time trying to dig up her grave, and that he didn't get to see her face at that point, but he was just convinced that her presence was there, whispering in his ear and driving him slowly crazy because he goes and sleeps in her room and stuff and everything like that. Linton dies, which keeps Kathy in captivity as Heathcliff figures out what to do with her. Getting remarried would kind of be her only escape, but Heathcliff prevents her from leaving or talking to anyone, which is probably going to push us into the next phase of the story, which I imagine involves Kathy probably getting married or maybe murdering Heathcliff. I don't know, but somehow she's going to have to rise above all the horrible people in her life and break the curse that Catherine and Heathcliff created years ago. Oh, and now that we're fully in the present, Lockwood finally gets to play a part in Kathy's story by showing up to tell Heathcliff that he's done with this shit show, and drops off a letter to Kathy from Nellie. Kathy's so wrapped up in her own hell, where all help from others is lost, and she doesn't really get what he's doing. It doesn't even occur to her, like, oh, he's dropping off a letter, I should keep this secret and read it. like the old days. Now she's just so wrapped up in her crabbiness and being around assholes that she's just like, what the hell is this? So, she's so devoid of hope that when the topic of books comes up and her love of them, since she has no access to them anymore, she gets snotty about it and actually sabotages her chances to have any, which all get thrown in the fire. And grossly enough, Lockwood kind of imagined him being her white knight, saving her from this situation, like any incel basement nice guy that sees a woman who's completely oppressed. He's like, oh, this is my chance. So with that, why don't you go home? And then I can go back to my own life, and I'll try and see if I can pull one of these off within a week. I don't know why I'm getting lazy. I'm doing every other week lately. That's lazy. That's never going to keep this business going. All right, well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, there's that. Are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people. Not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also, just in the curious mind, we made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And we're working on a new show where we give relationship advice by reading paranormal smut. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly, glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdlinger or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.